I'll say it right now. Heir to the Jedi isn't a great book. It's not even a good book. It's very mediocre. It suffers from something that absolutely kills a book. Boredom. It's also a book that feels distinctly not Star Wars, despite having a young Luke Skywalker as the main character. The blurb makes it sound so good. Hot off the heels of the destruction of the Death Star, Luke Skywalker, hero of the rebellion, aims to help the rebels in any way possible while he desperately tries to learn new things about the Force without any guidance. There's so much potential there. What the blurb doesn't tell you is that about 5% of the book is about Luke learning about the Force. The rest of it is evenly split between ridiculous invisible aliens that suck out people's brains, menial tasks for various people who help fund the rebellion, and some space slut called Nakari. And I'm warning you right now, if you haven't read the book, there will be spoilers for the end of the book. So turn away now if you don't want to know what happens. If you've read it, then it won't spoil anything. If you haven't read it, I will spoil the book for you. So turn away now. The book is set between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, a period of time that offered so much potential, not just for Luke's story, but the stories of all the core characters and the rebellion as well. Unfortunately, we never really get to see any of that. All we get to see is Luke. I'll say this for Kevin Hearn, he did a good job of capturing Luke's essence as he was in A New Hope. Young, headstrong, not entirely always forward thinking, and for want of a better description, kiddish. That last one particularly shines through when it comes to Nakari, the space slut, but I'll get to her later. The book's written in first person perspective. This wasn't an issue for me. Yeah, I know not many Star Wars books are written like that, and if I had my way it would have been written in third person, but there's nothing bad about the book because it's presented in first person. In the old canon we had I, Jedi, which is one of my favourite Star Wars books, and both books show that first person isn't a bad thing, it's just a change of pace. Look at Aftermath. In my opinion, being present tense didn't detract from it, it was just different. Heir to the Jedi's the same thing, it's just a change of pace, there's nothing wrong with it. In fact, I would say there's certain moments where being in first person perspective really helps put you there. The book mostly revolves around Luke's relationship with Nakari and a couple of missions he's sent on. The first one involves him negotiating a deal with rebel sympathisers who are willing to trade weapons with the rebellion provided Luke makes a good first impression. There wasn't much to this mission, except that it seemed to be an excuse for Luke to find a lightsaber. In the first act, Luke goes to Rhodia, where there just happens to be the tomb of a Jedi who was buried with his lightsaber, and knew... Guess who he knew? You guessed it, Anakin Skywalker. How fucking convenient. In the first act, we already have a reference to the prequels, please stop it Disney, and a spare lightsaber. Funny how Luke didn't have to do any research tracking down the lightsaber, it just landed neatly in his path. Almost like somebody wanted to explain how Luke managed to build a lightsaber between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. It would have been much better to put this in another book, or even mention in another book that it was part of his training with Yoda on Dagobah. The explanation was much better in the old canon. In Shadows of the Empire, Luke went to Ben's home on Tatooine and went through his old journals, learning more about the Jedi that he hadn't learned from Yoda, and also learning how to construct a lightsaber. It made sense for Ben to have these journals, and for Luke to find them, since Ben was a Jedi. Of course he's going to have teachings in his home, and knowing Luke would eventually be trained, of course he would have had a contingency plan for Luke to learn this stuff, in case one day he wasn't around to teach him. Instead of this pre-planned, well thought out story that we had in Legends, what we've got in the new canon, Heir to the fucking Jedi, we're supposed to just believe he walked out onto a marsh one day and there was a grave of a Jedi with a lightsaber in it. 10,000 Jedi in the Old Republic, but apparently one of them was buried just where Luke happens to be. Yeah, alright, that's believable. Not good story writing, to be honest, not deep in the slightest, and it's lazy. So Luke takes the lightsaber, makes a good first impression and reports back to the rebels for another mission. Luke's new mission is to go with the space whore Nakari and try to bring some aliens back to Nakari's dad. Her dad, who is rich, would then help fund the Rebel Alliance. But man, does this bit suffer. Star Wars is supposed to be fun and adventurous excitement. This bit is Luke, who at this point in the Star Wars saga is full of beans. You know, he's full of energy, can't keep himself still. Nakari, some super hot space slut. And do you know what? They can barely move because they're in super armoured spacesuits that are so heavy they literally can't move. They're that heavy because of the armour. And they have to wear these as a necessary precaution because the aliens, they like to stick stingers in people's brains and suck their brains out. This section just slows down the book unnecessarily and detracts from the pacing of the book. I like the imagination here, but I think it's one of those ideas that was just better on paper. It's too slow for it to be a good Star Wars plot. It's just far too slow and slows the pace of the entire book down. If you look at books in the new canon, there's Thrall, which is fairly fast. It spans probably at least a decade, which makes it seem like a lot happens. There's A New Dawn, which only takes place on one planet and, a Star Destroyer and a space station right next to the planet. But it's non-stop fun and adventure. And there's also Lost Stars, which again takes place over many years, but over roughly the same amount of pages, so it feels like it actually has a lot of content in it. The last thing Heir to the Jedi needed was anything slowing it down, which is actually ironic because the best moments in Heir to the Jedi are when absolutely nothing is happening. No explosions, no running, no adventure, and definitely no brain-sucking aliens or space whores. The best moments in Heir to the Jedi occur when Luke is just sitting there trying to connect with the Force, usually by trying to move something small like a vegetable or a single noodle. It's interesting to see Luke's approach to learning this new skill with limited information and no more Ben to help him. I still wish he had gone to Ben's hut, I really do, but I understand that as part of the rebellion he's got to go where he's needed, but there's 3 years between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, so I don't see why he couldn't have gone back once in 3 years. But when Luke is learning and sitting himself down at peace, trying to centre himself and touch the Force, these are by far the best moments in the book, because where it's written in first person, it really does put you in Luke's shoes, so you experience his attempts with and as him, instead of as if someone is recounting the tale to you. It's very immersive and it's quite enjoyable, these moments. That is, I liked these moments until the last one. The last one fucking pissed me off, man, but we'll get to that. There's a romance subplot throughout the whole book which I found completely unnecessary and just detracted from the whole experience for me. I get that in these old style adventures the hero used to get the girl and all that. Hell, just look at A New Hope when Luke swings across the Death Star chasm and Leia kisses him and then he swings and you know, brilliant. But it doesn't work in this book. Either have it as a character growth book where we see Luke growing as a Jedi, as a person and as the face of the rebellion, or have a fantastic adventure. If you actually look at Empire Strikes Back, that's character growth for Luke. And if you notice, there isn't actually a lot of Luke doing stuff. There's the beginning, Hoth, but he hadn't gone through his Jedi training yet. Then there's Dagobah, and that's it for Luke, right up until that final battle with Vader. You see, his character growth comes at the expense of excitement in Empire Strikes Back, but it works. Kevin Hearn has combined character growth with adventure here, and it just doesn't work. I'm not saying there aren't instances where it can work, but in this particular occasion it doesn't work. On the one hand, we have Luke blowing up Imperial ships by himself, dealing with brain-eating aliens and flirting with Nakari. On the other hand, we have a look into Luke's explorations into the Force. The issue isn't that they're both in the same book, the issue is that Kevin Hearn felt the need to combine them, and I wish somebody would shoot him for it. Now, if you haven't read the book, turn away now, because I'm seriously going to spoil the end of the book for you now. You have been warned. Now, I actually wrote this review months ago, well before The Defenders was on Netflix, but I'm still going to keep this analogy in here because it's relevant. If you watch Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage and Iron Fist, you know they all have one person in common, Claire Temple. Now, if you're a fan of those shows, you know the big fear people have is, or people had, was, that Marvel would kill off Claire in order for the creation of the Defenders to occur. It doesn't need to happen. We didn't want it to happen. The fans will feel cheated, and it will just cheapen the creation of the team and the individual characters when it happens. They already know they're on the same side and fighting for the same thing. They don't need Claire Temple to die in order for them to fight together. And I'm not going to spoil that for any of you who haven't watched The Defenders yet, don't worry. Well, that is exactly what Kevin Hearn did with this book. Serious spoilers for the end of the book now. Nakari dies, thank God. I'm okay with that. What I'm not okay with is, because she died, Luke now used the Force. I shit you not. Luke only learns to use the Force after his love interest dies, and he can only use it by thinking about her. It's just such a cheap plot device. It's so transparent. This is why having the two combined in this book does not work. Luke can only use the Force when he thinks of Nakari. What the fuck was Kevin Hearn thinking? What the fuck was Disney thinking, allowing this bullshit? This undermines the entire Star Wars saga. What, you can only use the Force if you've fancied a girl, if you've loved a girl? No, it's bullshit. You use the Force because somehow, and if you do want to go to Phantom Menace, then let's go with midichlorians. If not, then it's something else. You know, you have a connection to this Force, the Force. I can't see Yoda shacking up with someone, the bitch dying, and then him going, "Oh, use the Force now I can." It doesn't work like that. It's a mental and spiritual connection that doesn't require anybody else to die. This is just such a missed opportunity. Throughout the whole book we've been following Luke's attempts to connect to the Force, but it turns out it was all a waste of time. He needed a space whore to die so that he can think about how warm she made him feel. Only then can he use the Force. What was the point writing about Luke learning if he didn't actually learn anything, and if he was never capable of reaching this new spiritual plane? If he was never capable of reaching it on his own anyway? That means when I've been reading these pages, they've just been put there as filler. Because we know he's not going to do it anyway. Because he had to have Nakari die first. It's so cheap. It's not a good Star Wars plot point. I hope you guys know Yahtzee, who does Zero Punctuation. If you don't, watch some of his stuff on YouTube. He's amazing. And specifically watch his Tomb Raider review. In his review of Tomb Raider, right at the end, he points out that things happening to a character is not the same thing as character growth. If Lara Croft was tied to a boulder and that boulder was thrown off a cliff, her being pulled off the cliff with the boulder does not make it character development. This is the same thing. Throughout the whole book I was expecting Luke to have some kind of epiphany or breakthrough, just a small one, just enough for him to actually move onto the ability to move his lightsaber like he did in the Wampas Cave on Hoth. But the point was, he had to experience this epiphany, and it had to come from inside him, not an external thing. That's the point of spiritualism. It's internal, not external. But no, somebody dies and Luke can magically use the Force. It's cheap, it's nasty, it's not good writing, and it should never ever have been allowed. This ultimately is the problem with Nakari. Kevin Hearn knew she was going to die. You can tell from the way he wrote the character. She's every 13-year-old boy's wet dream. Sexy, gorgeous, tight clothes, incredibly flirty, very forward. There was no mystery to the way she was written because of how forward she is and how flirty and how sexy. She was clearly there to die. Fine, I can deal with that. But making her matter so Luke can use the Force, it cheapens everything about Luke's character and efforts when his abilities rely on the death of someone else. And why do they rely on someone else? With patience and practice, it would have happened. It would have happened. That's what the Jedi Order, that's how they trained the younglings. That's how, well, until this book came out, that's how Ben and Yoda trained Luke. With patience and practice, it would have happened. So why write a story like this? It's shit. It's fucking shit. Somewhere in the book, Kevin Hearn mentions how honoured he is to be the one telling the story of how Luke learnt to use the Force in the Wampus Cave. I wouldn't be proud if I produced this shit. I would not be proud. Not only do the characters not act the way they should, but the whole thing has this overly kiddie feel to it. I probably wouldn't be as harsh about it if it had been released under the young adult novel banner, but it wasn't. This was released as a fully fledged adult novel, and it just doesn't work. It feels like the ideas came from a child, it feels like it was written by a child. Honestly, it feels like Chuck Wendig's kid wrote this. It's that shit. Let me give you an example of what I mean by it feels like it was written by a child. How would you describe a bounty hunter spaceship? There are so many words you could use based on what type of ship it is. Boba Fett's huge, 2 parts to it, lasers at the bottom, 3 thrusters. It transforms depending on, the position it's in. I'm just doing this off the top of my head now, but there's a whole English language you can use to describe bounty hunter ships. Kevin Hearn describes one of them as, and I quote, looking like burnt toast. I shit you not, he describes it as burnt toast. He does this multiple times. This guy is writing the story of Luke Skywalker. Who okayed him to do this? The story is shit, the plot is shit, the characters are shit, his prose is shit. The whole thing is shit. Who allowed this? Who read it and went, that's a fucking good story, people are gonna love this? Nobody did quality control on this shit, just like nobody did quality control on Aftermath. 2 books, utter tripe, and they've just been released, and nobody at Disney cares. I'll say this for Disney, at least they've pulled their socks up a bit lately, last year or 2. They are paying a lot more attention, and I think that's Dave Filoni's input rather than being just Disney. But this book is shit. So what is the point of reading the book? I would say there isn't one. In fact, I would be very, very happy, ecstatic, over the moon, jubilant if Disney struck this from the official canon. Character growth is just an illusion. It's an illusion. It's fake. Luke didn't experience character growth. Somebody else died, and that forced him to use the Force. That's not character growth. That's tying Lara Croft to a boulder and pushing the boulder off the cliff. Characters are written so predictably, like Nakari, that you feel like you just want to roll your eyes. The pacing isn't great. The Deus Ex moment at the end just didn't need to happen. Nakari. If you like Star Wars, I beg you, stay away from Heir to the Jedi. It's not a good book, and it's definitely not a good Star Wars book. It's a steaming pile of shit.